Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're logging on from in the world, and welcome to our second keynote session in this Business and Places Day of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week, sponsored by Two Blues Solar. In this session, we're going to be looking at on-site power, also battery management, and how businesses can best power their EV fleets. We know that this is a big issue. On-site power purchase agreements, PPAs, for those that aren't aware of them, typically contracts between a project developer backed by a financial counterpart and a retailer. That's what they are. And they own and operate and maintain the renewable system for a term of typically 15 to 25 years. Our expert speakers in this session are going to take a closer look at the whole area of on-site power, also the use of PPAs, and also whether that's the right route to go down for a business. We're also going to look at the whole issue in the area of retrofitting and how do you actually make sure that businesses are actually providing the right kind of power mix and blend, both particularly for their employees. We'll also look at how companies should best power EV fleets. We've got a great panel. We've got Daniel Levine of Two Blues Solar. We've got Mike Nugent from Hitachi Zero Carbon, and Dito Davis, who is from the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. I'll introduce them just before each of them speak. After they speak, we've got a Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat box, any questions at all, and I'll get those answered, all being well, by our panel. Anyway, without further ado, our first speaker is Daniel Levine, who's the co-founder of Two Blues Solar, and he's going to hopefully outline some of the key factors to consider when deciding whether solar can deliver benefit for your business, as well as the types of organisations for whom an on-site power purchase agreement might be best suited. So, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Levine. As Andy said, I'm the co-founder of Two Blues Solar, and we are the funders of on-site solar projects for commercial and industrial businesses. So I guess before we go into the solar and the funding bit, it makes sense to talk a little bit about what on-site is and kind of how it's developed over time and what the kind of key drivers are behind it. I think in the past, when you thought about on-site generation, it was really about security of energy supply, and it really meant diesel generators. And I think now when people think about on-site generation, they think about solar panels, wind turbines, and there are other similar sustainable technologies. And I guess the drivers moved from just purely a security consideration to a financial and sustainability consideration. So those are the key reasons why I guess on-site started to happen. Plus, there's a much greater availability of technologies and skills. And there are complementary kind of initiatives that we've already touched on around kind of things like EV charging, where it makes sense to tie in on-site cheaper generation that's sustainable with your new technological improvements. So how does it actually work when you install an on-site generation source? The first thing you do is you put it in the ground or on your roof. You maintain your existing contract with your utility provider because they're intermittent sources of energy usually. When you turn your light switch on, it tries to draw first from that on-site source. And if that's available, it does so. If it isn't, it continues to draw from the utility that you were connected to before on the grid. And if that on-site source is generating more energy than you need, it flows that into the grid as well for everybody else's benefit. Oh, wow, I didn't realize this was going to do all the steps. I'll try and jump through them all in one go. So why do we focus on solar of all those different on-site generation pieces? Well, it's a well-established technology. It's been around 20 years, and the iteration of that has really improved many things in terms of reliability and cost. It's a sustainable source of energy, and in a typical project, you can be saving as much as 30 tons of carbon a year, which, I mean, and upwards in truth. Solar can generate 20 to up to 40% of your energy needs, and it's pretty reliable in terms of when you expect it to generate. And it's a very good news story that our clients love to show, and in fact, some have kind of digital displays in their lobbies showing how much carbon they've saved. And then in addition to the actual saving on carbon, it actually improves the EPC rating of your building, which is a regulatory requirement that people need to go through at the moment. Plus, it's a reasonably quick process to get it installed, 6 months as opposed to other technologies that may take longer, mainly because the planning process is kind of under permitted development now. So solar's so wonderful, why isn't everybody doing it? For large commercial projects we do, the main drawback is that the cost is quite high. It can be upwards of £500,000 onwards. So even if you do have that budget, it's whether spending that money on solar is the most important thing to you now, or whether you have other initiatives, new production lines, pushing into new countries and so on. I think also trusting an installer of a product that's 20, 25, now they're saying even up to 40 years of lifespan in a technology you don't really know is kind of a big leap of faith. And then a lot of businesses we work with are in buildings they lease. So how does that work if you've got a 40-year product you're trying to put on the roof, but you've only got 8 years left on a lease? How does that all come together? Plus, the application and installation processes are reasonably complex if you haven't done them before and it's not your forte. So it's hard to know whether you're doing the right thing. So that's where I think we come in. We collaborate with businesses to understand their wider ESG goals and understand how solar and our funding process can fit into that. And we fund 100% of the process. That's the planning, procurement, installation, and then the ongoing maintenance of the solar panels. So our clients don't have to worry about it at all. And ultimately, we earn that investment back by selling the power to our tenants of the buildings through a power purchase agreement, which means they'll typically pay us 10 to 12p rather than buying the energy from the grid at 30 plus p. And we also manage everything through from the beginning of that process all the way to the ongoing kind of sustainability reporting. Who can qualify? The truth is pretty much anyone. You're a tenant, you're a landlord, you're an owner-occupier. We can make power purchase agreements work for any of those people. And we focus in the commercial and industrial scale space. So that means you've got to be a reasonably large energy consumer and with a reasonably large roof. And so that's kind of our overview. I'm conscious that I'm probably already running over time, and I can see Andy nodding away. So I'll pass back to him to move on to the next.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks very much for that. It seems from what you're saying as well that there's rather like the last session that we had on EV charging infrastructure, there's still a degree of advice needed for organisations and companies and a certain degree of hand-holding, which clearly Two Blues Solar do provide with the clients that it works for. And I think we'll probably explore some more on that in the conversation. But for now, Daniel, thanks very much for that. Our next speaker is Mike Nugent, who's the head of Europe for Hitachi Zero Carbon. And he's going to talk about why battery management in particular is important, from charging optimization through to driver behavior, and why deploying a new energy system to vehicles requires a systematic approach to deployment and operation. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Morning, everyone. So yeah, how would you power your electric fleet? That actually raises a number of key questions, really. Immediately, how much power do you need? How much time do you have available to power your fleet? Because that will determine the power of your charge points, the capacity and the range of your vehicles. And also, how will you manage your batteries? Because that is really the key power source and the key risk around your fleet. And it's the thing that's probably most different to how we run fleets today. In particular, obviously, with diesel fleets, it's a lot more simple because there's a system already in place to deliver that. It's been around for quite a long time. And so really the key question that you really need to ask is, what is the charge that I need to actually drive my fleet? And then once you're clear about that, then you can determine the number and the size of the fleet, the capacity of your batteries, the range of your vehicles. And that's really what we as a business are all really focused on. And we're here to help organizations, fleet operations, accelerate the electrification and sustainability of their fleet. We want to reduce the risk around those batteries and the total cost of ownership, because electric fleets should actually be lower cost to run than diesel fleets in the longer term. And also generate new revenue streams, such as Daniel talked about, in terms of, well, that fixed asset base that these fleets have. They can actually be utilized to put solar panels in and battery storage. And the second life of the battery is a key part of where we sit within the organization, within Hitachi, but also where we sit within the market. So when we're thinking about bringing all of this together and powering a fleet, it's as I said, it's a very complex system that we're dealing with, and there are lots of different elements that you need to string together. And unfortunately, the way that a lot of fleets are being built and have been built in the past, it's very piecemeal. It's all very transactional, and you buy individual components. And clearly, when you're putting in a new system, you've got a lot more components. You're increasing the number of components arithmetically, but actually you're increasing the complexity of managing that geometrically. And really the big question you need to ask is then, so if I string all this together and something isn't working, I'm running a fleet. The big question is how do I make sure I've got enough power to actually deliver my services the following day? And that's really our big focus as a business, as to what we're focused on in terms of thinking about how do you get all of this working together. So we sit on top of all of this. We simplify that, and we are a technology company that really delivers both a managed service to support and enable the operation and make sure that vehicles are getting sufficient charge for their service the following day, but also then helping organizations actually build and transition across into electric fleet. And really bringing all of those things together is critical. The final thing that I'll talk about is about the battery. Clearly, that's the thing that everybody really at the moment, we don't know how long batteries are going to last, whether that's in a bus, an HGV, or a light commercial vehicle. So what we're focused on is how do you manage that battery within the warranty conditions, because a lot of vehicles being bought and they're not being managed in warranty conditions. People think they can just replace a battery, and for a bus that's about 120 grand. OEMs are going to start pushing back unless you can prove that you've actually managed that battery effectively. So we provide an audit trail and make sure that the whole charge that flows in to the battery is the right kind of charge in the right way, and you're not stressing that battery, but also then managing the battery from a kinetic energy point of view, through driver behavior, through climate, through other conditions which may impact the longevity of that battery. So our job is to make sure that you can really make those batteries last long. And the final point then, if you make those batteries last long, they have a higher residual value at the end of their life, and they can then be reused to support the solar solutions that Daniel was talking about. So that power can be generated often during the day, but might not be there much demand in the grid for that. If you store it in those batteries, and you've got nice, cheap second-hand batteries, which they may have lower capacity, but they still have the same amount of power, they can actually store a lot of power for you, and you can then resell and then create new revenue streams. And that's the final part of our business, is how do you utilize those new revenue streams, whether it be through the battery or whether it be through the fixed infrastructure that you put in place, which is only utilized maybe 50% of the day. So that 50% of the day it's not utilized could be used for private vehicle owners or other vehicle owners who want to get charged during the day. Hopefully that's given a good, clear picture of what we're all about. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, a lot of different moving parts there to get to grips with. And I'm glad you finished off with the kind of multiplicity of uses as well, which I think is quite important, particularly if this is going to get the take-up that we need it to get. And I'm sure we'll return to some of those points in the Q&A. Next up, we've got Guido Davis, who is the Director of Policy at the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. ACE in the UK represents some of the biggest engineering firms on the planet, actually, as well as in the UK. And I know that many of them are probably involved in scoping out some of the work that needs to be done around this area. Guido is going to offer his views on the need for businesses to consider retrofitting on-site solar and EV charging, as well as the need for new build projects to draw in these elements from the initial stages. Guido, the floor's yours.
Well, thanks, Andy. Thanks for that introduction, and good morning, everybody. As Andy said, my name is Guido Davis. I'm Director of Policy at the ACE. The ACE represents professional consultancies and engineering companies that operate in the social and economic infrastructure sectors. I wanted to use just the 5 minutes without slides just to explore the potential for on-site power purchase agreements and I think the seamless integration of charging infrastructure for business and the role of ACE members in that endeavour, particularly in driving the deployment of sustainable energy solutions, guiding businesses along the way towards optimal energy management. Firstly, I do think it's important to recognise that there is a growing desire among businesses who may be on this webinar or others to try and integrate renewable energy purchasing into their sustainability and their energy management programs. And I think that's a real testament to where we've come from and to the evolving landscape of available options. There's still a lot of unknowns, but we have come a long way very, very clearly. And in recent years, various factors have contributed to the surge in organisations considering renewable energy procurement. So energy cost savings, ambitious carbon reduction goals, public commitments, things that Daniel and Mike have already commented on. So I think that is really important to recognise. Through our members is, I would say, comprehensive understanding of the energy landscape and importantly the regulatory dynamics. They are increasingly facilitating the identification of suitable PPA opportunities that align with each business's needs, sustainability goals, financial aspirations, and really what we are seeing when we speak to members is that they are providing comprehensive support through the entire PPA life cycle. So they're playing a role in conducting feasibility studies, they're assessing the local renewable sources, they're conducting energy audits to really try to ascertain the viability and sustainability of the agreements. And really, our members' expertise in navigating what can be increasingly complex regulatory frameworks and market dynamics, I think enables businesses to really overcome some of the potential barriers, particularly if you're an SME, really wanting to get skin in the game. I also would like to think that, the role of AC members extends to facilitating the integration of on-site charging infrastructure within businesses' existing operational frameworks. They are positioned quite well, I think, to work quite closely with architects, with developers, with other stakeholders. They can leverage that technical expertise to devise, very comprehensive design plans that seamlessly incorporate sustainable energy solutions into new build projects. Their focus is, of course, on scalability and future proofing, and I think that enables businesses to really anticipate and accommodate for future energy demands, and that's important when you're trying to balance some of the risks. My final point would be that the strategic collaborations with utility providers is also really important, and the role that AC members play in that, in terms of fostering the seamless integration of on-site solar or EV charging infrastructure, and really by leveraging those partnerships, they are enabling businesses to gain quite valuable insights into different programs. So, in conclusion, I would say the role of AC members is fairly instrumental in driving the adoption of what can often need to be quite tailored, innovative, sustainable energy solutions that are aligning with businesses' unique operational requirements. They're providing that long-term growth aspirations, and really through that comprehensive expertise and strategic guidance, I think they can really empower businesses to embrace the transformational potential of on-site charging infrastructure at a time when there are still a lot of unknowns, but it is almost a who is going to jump first. And I think AC members are providing a lot of that guidance as part of their day-to-day. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much, Guito. And thanks. I was interested in what you said at the end there about who's going to jump first, because it could be argued that Two Blue Solar have jumped first in terms of what they're doing in this area. And I just wanted to know from Daniel, and I touched on it after he'd spoken, there is a lot of advice needed in this area. There is still a number of unknowns in terms of looking at the future. How are you navigating that landscape at the minute with the clients that you're working for, Dan?
It's a very good question. Ultimately, and you touched on this really, really early on, you're signing a PPA contract for 15 to 25 years, which has an embedded energy price in it. And there's an inherent consideration from the person that is buying that energy, how that's going to compare ultimately to what they are going to be able to purchase in the market. The information that's available currently around what energy prices are going to do is pretty complicated. And I think the key thing that we try to do is distill some of that information on behalf of clients. So we subscribe to Cornwall Insights and Aurora and Baringa and all of the energy data providers, and try to tell them how prices are expected to go in the future and how our price is ultimately going to compare to that. And as you say, it's really a case of trying to do the best job of representing the client's perspective.
How robust is that, though? And I know I'm not, well, I suppose I am asking you to use a crystal ball. How robust is that for the future? And how do we know that we're not going to be faced, 5-10 years down the line with a lot of dissatisfied people who are paying too much for their electricity?
It's a good question. I would say it's probably quite difficult to be robust for longer than a couple of years, as the last couple of years have shown us. I think the key thing is really understanding what the permutations are in contracts, and part of what we do is willing to cap our price at the price that they're able to purchase in the market, because we ultimately believe that the proliferation of sustainable, renewable energy is a core goal of our business. And if we can do that in line with where energy prices are going to go at the very minimum, and if not better than where energy prices are going to go, then we're serving two good goals.
Thanks, Dan. I've got a question for Mike. You're from Hitachi Zero Carbon, and obviously that's a household name. People be aware of Hitachi. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're only going to be specifying Hitachi products, does it? Just tell us about the interface between Hitachi Zero Carbon and I suppose Hitachi itself.
Sure. I think a lot of people confuse us at times with Hitachi Energy, which is the old ABB Power Grids business, and kind of think, are we here really to as just a front end to sell their infrastructure and their charging infrastructure, charge points and charging infrastructure? And the simple answer to that, from our point of view, is no. I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, essentially fleets traditionally have always bought what is the cheapest, most cost-effective, best deal that's available to them at a specific time, particularly on vehicles. And really that culture is not going to change very quickly. And to be honest, it's not our job to define that. But when you're putting in place a complex infrastructure like an electrified fleet, that does actually create really significant problems in terms of what we would refer to as interoperability. So certain charge points only easily work with certain vehicles, and you need to make sure that they do the handshakes, and you get firmware updates all the time. You get new software that comes along, and all of these things need to talk to each other. And ultimately, really, what a fleet operator, there's a massive opportunity to transform and improve and make more efficient fleet operations through this transition. And our vision is one of, how do you create a single pane of glass across all of those systems? So you've just got one system that draws all the data from multiple pieces of software and hardware and allows you to answer that question that I posed: how do I make sure my vehicles have sufficient fleet in the morning? So we take a very agnostic view. So we're a technology part of Hitachi. So we are completely agnostic. If the Hitachi solutions, which are excellent, are right for specific conditions, we will obviously make a recommendation to that, but it's entirely up to the fleet operator as to do that. But ultimately, it's their choice: what charge points, what vehicles. We just make sure that they all talk to each other and they have the right handshakes electronically, and that then that single pane of glass can be provided. I'm not hearing you, Andy.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. It always helps if you unmute. This is the first time I've done that, but there you go. It happens to the best of us. Mike spoke earlier about the whole area around batteries, and I just wanted to get Daniel's view on the risks, the potential risks, if you don't manage batteries effectively. Can you offer some insights around that, Dan?
I'd probably say that batteries aren't my area of expertise. I'll give you my 2 cents, and probably Mike can come back in and add on it. We've In terms of the kind of financial case of batteries on their own, alongside solar installations, we've really struggled to find that to be financially viable. But I really like what Mike was talking about earlier, the concept of reusing batteries, or potentially even using fleets as part of a battery solution, where they can be used kind of symbiotically to help with the broader energy considerations of the business. To answer specifically your question around maintenance of batteries, I think it's the same with all aspects of technology. If you are not constantly on top of the maintenance and monitoring of these things, there are potential risks, and you can reduce those risks by being really acute to the maintenance of them.
Yeah, I agree, Daniel. I think that they're clearly, so a lot of batteries it depends. Some markets are different to others. So in light commercial vehicles, the warranty on a battery is longer than the lease term. So it's really not that much of a concern. But what's more important is then making sure, and we're looking at kind of incentive models on residual value to make sure that actually the fleet operator is then utilizing those batteries in the best way possible, so that then the residual on those batteries and the residual on the whole vehicle is higher. And you can encourage people to charge and drive vehicles in a more, let's say, professional way, but a more battery friendly way over the life of the lease, which then actually makes sure that then those vehicles have got high residual value and greater longevity beyond that. With other fleets such as buses, you've got an 8-year warranty, and an OEM's not an idiot. The batteries are probably likely to last a lot longer than 8 years. They'll warranty for 8 years because that's kind of what their modeling is telling them. However, there are, it's a normal distribution of life. So there are going to be ones which fall away. Our job, as we see it, is how do you make sure you, first of all, manage the ones that are going to fail for dint of chemistry or just bad battery management system. Some kind of error could occur. Manage them out under warranty conditions so that doesn't have a massive impact on the fleet owner. But then really, really critically, how can you move the median point of that normal distribution to the right so that you can maybe get to 10 years? That has a massive balance sheet opportunity for organizations, because they'll depreciate those batteries over 8 years, because that's the warranty term. There's another 2 years of essentially of free use of that. And then it's still got a residual value. And then you can start thinking about, well, let's put that into a fixed installation. Let's use that as a cheaper source of battery storage. And that's even before I even start talking about V2G and how you could actually eventually use those batteries during the day if fleet is not being fully utilized to actually be mobile storage, and then selling that back to the grid. So there's myriad opportunities, and there are some amazing businesses, including our own, which are growing and building out of what we see as the potential from battery in the whole system to make sure that we can be more secure, as both as a nation and across the world, but more importantly, we can reuse and store that lovely energy that comes from sustainable resources.
Thanks, Mike. Gita, I was struck by what you said when you spoke, and you talked about the role of ACE members, of engineers and consultants, in all of this process. Given the fact that there's going to be a lot of retrofitting needed in certain areas, how are your members doing that work without compromising the existing structure and fabrics of buildings? How are they going about that?
I think that's fairly, this is the practical side of doing this, isn't it? There are different parts of the country which will move quicker, just for the case of how easy it is to do it. But I do think ACE members are going to be really instrumental in that almost seamless integration into existing buildings. And really what we're seeing is members taking a multifaceted approach, which involves evaluating the building's current framework. So, as a non-engineering background for the engineers in the world, load-bearing capacities, spatial constraints, any architectural intricacies, but they are, having to think more about this. They're having to design custom mounting systems that are ensuring integration whilst blending seamlessly with the building's architecture, and that's really important. So, planning, aligning energy consumption patterns, that's going to enhance overall operational efficiency. And I do think the fact that so many of our members have a real commitment to sustainable design principles and trying to meet those industry standards, it's allowing them to really implement innovative solutions as well, that is maximizing energy generation without compromising the building's structure. But this is going to be harder in some parts of the country, which is why on a regulatory front, there needs to be some flexibility and a recognition that we're going to be at different stages here, and some buildings are going to be far harder to get this done than others.
Thanks, Guido. Daniel, when you spoke earlier, you talked about the fact that there was a significant financial outlay involved in providing solar solutions. How are you finding that process of discussion with potential clients, navigating some of that kind of landscape, and also, I suppose, whether it's the right word is reassuring, or at least, convincing businesses that this is the right way to go for them?
Sure. So the large capital outlay that I talked about is ultimately their alternative option. Their alternative option to going down the power purchase agreement route is to fund the installation themselves. And I think from our perspective, it's quite an easy job to convince them that we'll fund it for them. I think the consideration on their part is, ultimately, if you do fund this yourself and you are willing to make that outlay, and you don't have competing priorities over the longer term, and I'm talking 15 years plus, you will ultimately save more money doing that than a power purchase agreement. So I think the bit that we are, I guess, talking more to our clients about is what their long-term aspirations are, and what they could alternatively do with that capital, even if it's an equivalent sustainable initiative, whilst we then take care of the solar and ultimately secure an energy price for them.
One of the points that came up earlier was this, and we've had this in other sessions as well, and this whole area of interoperability. How much of a challenge is that for what we're trying to do in this particular field? And I'm going to address this initially to Mike. I mean, is it a potential blocker to what we're trying to do here, or do you think the industry and technology will move with how that whole situation develops?
I think it's interesting. We're seeing it evolving in different ways in different markets depending on where they are on their maturity curve. So the kind of the last mile delivery market and sort of postal delivery services.
Mike will come back. There he is.
Sorry. Hello.
Yeah, just carry on, Mike.
I think so. It depends.
He's broken again. I don't know whether you are you with us, Mike?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Go on. That's fine. Yes, just carry on. Just answer the question again. That's great.
I'll do my best. Okay. Hopefully we'll stick along. So it depends on the maturity of the markets that we're dealing with. So like commercial vehicles and last mile delivery, they tend to have already gone down a path where they're actually now confronting that kind of interoperability because they bought lots of different vehicles. They bought lots of different charge points. We're actually working with Norwegian Post, where they've got multiple different vehicles and different charge points, some closed charge points and some open. So that increases, the operating system on charge points is another consideration. So to answer your question quickly, yes, it is a blocker, but I think there are technologies and solutions like ourselves now that are embracing that. What we're trying to do with the markets of bus and EHGV is trying to fix that problem before it started. Because really for fleets, what we're trying to do is, can we make them actually more efficient? Let's not hard code inefficiency into that, because interoperability problems are inefficiency. It's not thinking. It's very difficult though for a fleet operator. They can't buy a whole new fleet and a whole new system all in one go. So of course they're going to pilot and test different technologies. but that is actually hard coding in complexity and interoperability challenges. So we've just got to help them go through that process, and that's what we do to at least get the pilots, get the understanding, and get the mindset right for electrification, but then try and open it up to a more open system where you can have that single pane of glass and you fix that interoperability earlier before it becomes a bigger challenge.
Great, thanks, Mike. Just finally, in wrapping things up, I just want to ask one question to each of you, and if you can give a brief, succinct reply if you can. Why should we be optimistic about the progress that we're making in this sector and also the progress that we will make going forward? And I'll address that first to Daniel.
I think it's really easy to be optimistic. I think the price of energy as we integrate more renewable sources will ultimately come down in a wholesale sense. I think we're ahead of our targets in terms of where we want to go in terms of achieving net zero. I think companies are taking a real leading step in this. I think they do that from a financial as well as an environmental consideration. I think one of the things that's been really positive is the general excitedness about people when you call them and talk to them about solar, and I imagine Mike will say the same when you talk about EVs. That it's not difficult to have these kinds of conversations. People are very excited about the future. So, yeah, I'm positive.
Great, thanks for that, Daniel. What about yourself, Goto? Are your members excited about working in this sector?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if I just reflect on my time with the AC so far, the shift in just the involvement, but also, the sense of the role that our members have in really getting us to that place has really grown. I think for me, building on what Daniel was saying, reasons to be optimistic. That growing environmental consciousness is really clear to see. There is an escalation, as it were, of awareness and really the need for businesses to combat climate change. And that's led to a real collective commitment to sustainable energy practices. And, businesses and communities are increasingly prioritizing renewable energy integration, which our members are going to be having a part to play. And I think just, weeks like this where we have webinars to discuss really shows that there's a reason to be optimistic, because we are making collaborative partnerships and we're sharing knowledge. And that collaborative effort of the industry, stakeholders, researchers, engineering professionals, it's really fostered a culture of knowledge sharing and collaboration. And they will be instrumental in accelerating technology advancements, addressing some of the challenges that we have discussed today, but also fostering some innovation in the renewable energy sector. So yeah, lots of reasons to be really optimistic.
Thanks, Guido. Mike, yourself, you're optimistic about the future. I assume you are.
Very optimistic about the future. Quick response. I was at Busworld, a big bus conference a few weeks back. 4 years ago, there were 1 or 2 electric buses. This year, it was 1 or 2 non-electric buses. The world is changing. Businesses are driving it despite fluctuations in government policy. And I think there is a desire to make a difference. And we want to help that happen quicker.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. And I'm really struck that phrase that Guido used, which I think could almost be a strapline for this whole week, a collective commitment to sustainable energy implementation. I think that really underlines what we're talking about here. Once again, we've run out of time in a session. I'd just like to thank all of our panelists, Daniel Levine from 2 Blue Solar, Mike Nugent from Hitachi Zero Carbon, and Guido Davis from the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. Coming up next, starting at 11 o'clock, we have our third keynote session and our final keynote session of the day on the absolutely topical issue of natural capital and the key importance of nature-based solutions in the response to climate change. It's a subject that I'm absolutely really interested in. Can't wait for that panel session to start. As always, if you want to join that session, just stay on the current link that you've got or re-log on, and we'll be back after a short break. So we will see you at 11 a.m.